Crash Course in Philosophy, Module 1. Intro. The philosophy program at CSN is one of the more diverse subjects being taught, with each instructor adopting a widely different approach to the subject and covering a broad array of different topics. Tutors first starting out here have often expressed a number of difficulties, including 1. Knowing some of the key branches of philosophy and topics, 2. The structure of philosophy at CSN, and 3. Understanding how the requirements and courses are organized. So, while this training cannot possibly go over the details of every instructor and their course, this module will help you to understand what are some of the basics of philosophy and the way it's taught at CSN. Step 1. Main philosophers. Philosophy can be broken down into the following key historical periods. First, we have the pre-Socratics, ranging from the 7th to the 5th century BC, including philosophers like Thales, Zeno, Heraclitus, Democritus, and Parmenides. Next, we have the Socratic period, ranging from the 5th to the 4th century BC. This includes philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Next, we have the Roman and medieval period of philosophy, ranging from the 1st century BC all the way to the 14th century AD. This includes philosophers like Boethius, Cicero, Augustine, Aquinas, and Anselm. Next, we have the Age of Reason in the 17th century, including a number of philosophers like Hobbes, Descartes, Pascal, Spinoza, Locke, and Leibniz. After that, we have the Age of Enlightenment in the 18th century, with philosophers like Berkeley, Rousseau, Hume, and Kant. Next, we have the modern philosophy period in the 19th century, looking at philosophers like Bentham, Mill, Russell, Hegel, and Marx. Finally, we have the contemporary or 20th century onwards philosophy, which includes philosophers like Sartre, Foucault, Ryle, Ayer, Quine, Heidegger, and many others. Step 2. Metaphysics. Some of the main ideas in this topic include things like existence, identity, objects, form, properties, nature, God, space and time, cause, possibility, necessity, and free will. Metaphysics is the discipline of philosophy that primarily deals in 1. What exists out there in the universe, and 2. What is the nature of those things in the universe. Typically then, metaphysics will ask questions about whether or not things are possible or real, how they fit together, how properties and objects relate, and the workings of cause and effect. As such, metaphysics is usually the basis of most other branches in philosophy, since determining how the world is tends to guide our other attempts to determine things like knowledge, morality, etc. Step 3. Key topics, metaphysics. Here we have some examples of a few of the main questions that come up in metaphysics. The first of these is existence and properties, looking at things like what is it for a thing to exist, and how do things relate to their attributes. Next, we have identity and change, looking at things like what does it mean to be a person, and how does identity persist despite change. Another main topic in metaphysics is mind and body relations, looking at whether human beings have souls, and how do they interact with the body. Next, we have necessity and probability, looking at things like what does something being necessary mean, and what makes something possible. Another main topic is free will and determinism, looking at things like do human beings have free will, or is everything already predetermined? God is another main topic in metaphysics, people asking questions like does God exist, and what relationship does God have with the universe? Finally, looking at space and time, we can ask questions like is there space without physical objects, and how do things exist across time? Step 4. Epistemology. Some of the main ideas within epistemology include things like truth, belief, justification, concepts, types of knowledge, reliability, reasoning, memory, fallibility, experience, and skepticism. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy that primarily deals with 1. How we come to acquire knowledge, and 2. Whether or not we are justified in our beliefs. Generally then, epistemology will be concerned with whether or not something is true, how do we distinguish knowing versus believing, different types of knowledge, and how evidence fits into what we know. After metaphysics helps us understand the nature of the world, epistemology helps us to explain what we believe and why. Step 5. Key topics, epistemology. Here we have some examples of a few of the main questions that come up in epistemology. First of all, we have belief and knowledge, looking at things like what is it to know something, and how do we distinguish this versus beliefs. Second, we have justification and truth, looking at questions like how do we know if our beliefs are true, and what counts as justification. Next, we have reason and observation, looking at things like what do we know via pure reason, and are repeated observations valid evidence? Then we have realism and idealism, asking questions about if there is a real world, and how can we know? A main topic in epistemology are words and definitions, where we can consider things like how do words fit in with context, and how do language and knowledge relate to one another. Another main topic in epistemology is memory, where we can consider things like how do memory and knowledge fit together, and are beliefs justified over time? Finally, we can consider things like skepticism, asking questions like can we really know anything, or are all our beliefs open to doubt? Step 6. Logic. Some of the main ideas within logic include things like premises, conclusions, validity, strength, fallacies, assumptions, implications, and deductive and non-deductive arguments. Logic is the branch of philosophy that primarily deals with 1. What is the structure of an argument, and 2. Whether or not the reasoning of an argument is good or bad. Logic fundamentally considers things like what form the premises and conclusions of our argument, how they fit together, whether our points are strong, and whether there are any gaps in reasoning. Generally then, logic runs parallel to epistemology, with the former more concerned with the structure and strength of our arguments than the process of how we come to acquire new knowledge and beliefs. Step 7. Key topics, logic. Here we have some examples of a few of the main questions that come up in logic. First, we have arguments and structure, where we can look at things like what is the structure of an argument, and how do we map it out? Second, we have validity and strength, where we can ask questions like is this argument valid, and what would make this argument stronger? Next, we have deductive and non-deductive arguments, where we can consider things like can we get to the conclusion via reasoning alone, or do we need more evidence? Then we have categories and relations, where we can look at things like how do groups relate to one another, and how do we process categorical syllogisms. The main topic in logic are assumptions and fallacies, where we can ask questions like are there any assumptions in the argument, or is this point just a distraction? Another main topic in logic are paradoxes, where we can consider things like can things be both true and false, or how do we handle contradictory information? Finally, we have truth tables, where we can look at things like how do we symbolize the premises and conclusions, and is the argument valid? Step 8. Ethics. Some of the main ideas in ethics include things like morality, right and wrong, good and evil choices, justification, conduct, acceptable behavior, virtues, justice, pleasure, and purpose. Ethics is the branch of philosophy that primarily deals with 1. What things should be deemed good and bad, and 2. Why are some things right or wrong? Most ethical questions will talk about determining if we should do something or not, finding out why that is, how our intentions and consequences relate, and how our moral beliefs apply to others. While metaphysics and epistemology help us understand the universe and how we justify the knowledge we obtain from it, ethics chiefly addresses how that fits into moral claims and our beliefs. Step 9. Key topics, ethics. Here we have some examples of a few of the main questions that come up in ethics. First, we have value and morality, asking questions like, what is it to value something? And how do we work out if something is good? Second, we have ethics and religion, looking at things like, how do religion and morality relate? And do moral rules come from God? Next, we have consequentialism and situation ethics, where we can consider things like, is the consequences all that matters? Or does morality depend on the situation? Then we have absolutism and relativism, where we can ask questions like, are things always right and wrong? And how do we prescribe morality to others? A main topic in ethics is hedonism and purpose, where we can look at things like, how do we weigh up pleasure versus purpose? And how do we determine priorities? Another main topic in ethics are meta-ethics, where we can consider things like, can we ever know if something is right or wrong? And how does this relate to the facts? Finally, we can look at things like pragmatism, where we can ask questions like, should we do whatever is practical? Or do ethics adapt to whatever is beneficial? Step 10. Other areas. These are just a few of the main branches of philosophy, but there are many others out there. Some of the other disciplines of philosophy include things like 1. Political philosophy, 2. Philosophy of language, 3. Philosophy of the mind, 4. Aesthetics, and 5. Eastern philosophy. Generally, these more advanced subjects are covered after 101 or 102, but it's good to know that they exist. This way, if there is overlap with the student's material, you can find resources and learn the basics in order to help them with their work. Step 11. Picking up the basics. While there are a lot of different philosophers and ideas to cover in this subject, hopefully the previous slides will give you a quick snapshot. But, as every class is different, and students have to cover a wide range of material, it's important to do your own research to read up on things in greater detail. Start off by looking online or through your notes to go over each of their main ideas, arguments, and analysis on an as-needed basis. Don't focus on trying to learn each of the philosophers or subjects all at once. Rather, like your students, you will need to break it down step by step, acquainting yourself with different readings or resources. Step 12. CSN Outcomes. According to the philosophy page on the CSN website, currently listed student outcomes are as follows. Students must be able to demonstrate knowledge of influential thinkers and arguments that have been advanced in the history of the Western intellectual tradition and contemporary thinkers. Students must also be able to demonstrate knowledge of some of the core concepts and vocabulary related to metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, aesthetics, and logic. Students must be able to demonstrate an ability to think critically, such as the ability to identify inconsistencies, presumptions, and implications in sets of claims. Finally, students must be able to demonstrate the ability to think objectively, that is, dispassionately about their own personal convictions, whether they are religious, political, or social in nature. As you can see from the above, most outcomes do not have particular subject requirements, but instead focus on developing a main skill set for handling a variety of topics. Step 13. Being objective. As well as being an important skill for assessing philosophy in general, thinking objectively is considered a key component of success in the philosophy program at CSN. This means that students will typically want to set aside their own beliefs or convictions before approaching a topic, as a given argument or text will need to be assessed on its own merits. Furthermore, students will frequently have to explain not only that something is bad or wrong, but will also have to say why it is so. In this context, because I believe it is not an acceptable justification and will rarely help them in a discussion or assignment. Instead, students should be looking for proper reasons and evidence to deal with any argument, not rely on their feelings or intuitions. Step 14. Critical thinking. Once students start thinking more objectively, one of the first things they will need to develop is their critical thinking skills. It will not just be enough for students to simply memorize the information that's presented or have somebody do the work for them. Instead, it is important that students can understand, analyze, and evaluate key ideas and topics. Students will have to learn the material and then think for themselves to get the answers. Therefore, students will want to not only focus on being objective during the course, but will need to think both clearly and rationally in order to effectively identify and assess the arguments presented. Step 15. 101 classes. All 101 classes differ enormously, but there are a lot of key components that are core to each. Generally speaking, 101 classes will be very reading comprehension based, asking students to 1. Go through and understand a given piece of reading material. 2. Find the main steps, premises, and conclusions of the argument. And 3. Focus on explaining what is being said in their own terms. As a tutor, you could not possibly be expected to know and understand every particular reading, assignment, or philosopher. However, you can help them with the core skills, work through the main ideas, and get them to understand the arguments involved. Step 16. 102 classes. While 101 classes tend to focus on how students can identify and understand an argument, 102 is focused on analysis and evaluation. Generally speaking, 102 classes will focus a lot on the strength and effectiveness of a given argument, asking students to 1. Analyze the material they're reading and determine its effectiveness. 2. Identify the strengths and weaknesses of a given argument. And 3. Work on improving and making strong arguments of their own. A lot of 102 classes also cover logic, which is very similar to math in its approach and will be something you just have to learn in advance. Much of the advice for dealing with this particular area is available both in the Helpful Links module in Canvas and elsewhere online. Step 17. Online classes. Online classes typically follow very similar formats to the 101 and 102 classes in terms of material, but generally differ in terms of structure. While submissions of essays and assignments is generally reasonably similar, typically, students will be participating in online discussion threads rather than having group discussions in class. This means that they need to try and work a little ahead of time, as it can often take a bit longer for the instructor or other classmates to respond to their questions or issues as they come up. Furthermore, students will want to regularly stay in touch with their instructor by email if they need additional help, and should expect to check their email and Canvas inbox for any replies. Step 18. Instructor support. Generally, you won't be alone out there in helping your students work through this difficult subject. You should encourage students to get additional feedback or help from their instructor when they need it, since the teacher is frequently the best person to assist them with a tricky topic or assignment. Aside from reaching them by email or phone, all instructors have office hours where students can visit them in person for further aid. Both you and the student should look for any resources the instructor has already provided, including the assignment sheets, syllabus, previous feedback, and other helpful resources. Finally, the reading list for each instructor's course is available in the Helpful Links module in Canvas, as well as from the bookstore. Step 19. Conclusion. This completes Module 1. Please feel free to revisit any slides within this module and take any notes you need. There will be a quiz to assess your knowledge of the material within this training module, so see the relevant link in Canvas. After taking the quiz, remember to check your answers and retake the assessment if needed. A score of 100% is required. See the relevant Module 1 discussion thread as needed for this topic in Canvas for any further questions or comments.